I'm Berислав Marушich and I go by Beri. I'm a philosophy professor at Brandai's University. Today I'm going to continue talking about the problem of promising against the evidence. I'll talk about 4 responses to the problem that I think have some apparent plausibility, but that don't really work. But let me first remind you of the problem. The problem is, can we responsibly promise to do something when we have evidence that we might not follow through with our promise? For example, can you responsibly promise to spend the rest of your life with someone? It seems that the answer must be no. That is because if we believe, as our evidence suggests, that we might not follow through with our promise, we seem to be insincere in making it. For example, if you believe that you might not, in fact, spend the rest of your life with the other person, you can't sincerely promise that you will. Yet if we believe that we will follow through with our promise, we seem to be irrational, precisely because our evidence suggests that we might not. For example, if you believe, in light of your evidence, that you only have an 80% chance to keep your promise, and 80% is a good number, then it seems irrational to believe that you will in fact keep your promise. So it seems that we must be insincere in promising against the evidence. Yet whether we are insincere or irrational, we are liable to mislead the person we are making our promise to. Therefore, it seems, we cannot responsibly promise against the evidence. Yet we make such promises all the time. What then shall we say about such promises? Today, I want to consider 4 possible responses. The first response many people give is this: we can't responsibly promise against the evidence, we can only responsibly promise to try. I think that this is pretty clearly a non-starter. Can you imagine promising to try to spend the rest of your life with someone? Imagine saying, I promise to try to be faithful to you. Why not add, and if I'm unfaithful, it will be unwillingly? Even though promising to try is clearly a non-starter, it is not easy to say why that should be. After all, what more can we do than try, or try our hardest? Here is why it's wrong to merely promise to try to be faithful, or to spend the rest of your life with someone. It makes sense to merely promise to try to do something if we anticipate that we might be prevented from doing it. If I think that my train might be late, it makes sense to merely promise to try to meet you at 2 p.m., since something that is outside of my control might prevent me from being there on time. But being faithful is entirely up to us, and this means that we cannot be prevented from being faithful. The only way we will fail to be faithful is if we don't try, or don't continue trying to be. Similarly, the only way we will fail to be nice around the holidays, or fail to spend money on luxury stuff, or fail to quit smoking, is if we don't try or don't continue trying. But merely promising to try to do something suggests that we are not prepared to promise to do it. And so it suggests that we are precisely not prepared to try our hardest. Matters are more complicated when it comes to promising to spend the rest of our life with someone. This is not something that is entirely up to us. After all, the other might leave us. But in this case, we deliberate as if matters were entirely up to us. To borrow Kant's dictum, we act under the idea of freedom. And it is understood that to the extent that matters are not up to us, to that extent our promise is not binding. If you promise to spend the rest of your life with someone, and the other person leaves you, you are not obliged to become a stalker. The second response maintains that sincerely promising to do something does not require believing that we will succeed. It only requires intending to do it, and we can intend without believing in success. For example, you can intend to spend the rest of your life with the other person without believing that you will. The trouble with this response is that our intentions inform our outlook of what will happen. The easiest way to see this is to consider how we would express an all-out intention. Suppose you all-out intend to go to Sam's party. You would say, I'll go to Sam's party. Similarly, if you intend to spend the rest of your life with someone and sincerely promise to do so, you'll say, I promise to spend the rest of my life with you. This does not leave open the question of what you will do. It would be very odd for the other person to say, Great, but who will you spend the rest of your life with? The conclusion to draw from this is perhaps that intentions are beliefs, or that they involve beliefs. But one could also think that there is a strong normative relation between intentions and beliefs, so that if you all out intend to do something, you should all out believe that you will do it. This is something that I think we can leave open. The third response maintains that when we sincerely promise to do something, we decide to do it. And when we decide to do something, we gain a distinct kind of knowledge that we will do it, an agent's knowledge, or, to use Elizabeth Anscombe's phrase, practical knowledge. For example, when you decide to go out for lunch, you gain knowledge that you will go out for lunch, in virtue of deciding to do so. Thereby you don't need evidence, and your knowledge is not based on evidence. Your knowledge is grounded in your decision. But then, if you know that you will do what you are promising to do, you can rationally believe in success despite your evidence. The trouble with this response is that when we promise against the evidence, we don't seem to have agent's knowledge that we will follow through with our promise. That is because the evidence is a defeater for our knowledge. It prevents us from having knowledge. To illustrate, consider a very different kind of example, involving mathematical knowledge. Suppose you calculate something by longhand. Your calculation is accurate, and you have made no mistake. It seems that you have mathematical knowledge of the result of your calculation. But if you acquire evidence that there is a good chance that you made a mistake, say, because you often make mistakes when you do such calculations, this will defeat your mathematical knowledge, even if your calculation was perfect. Analogously, your evidence that there is a good chance that you will fail to do what you are promising to do will defeat any agent's knowledge that you might have had when you made your promise. Your situation would be analogous to a case in which you proved something mathematically, but had empirical evidence that you made a mistake. Finally, the fourth response maintains the hardline view that we cannot responsibly promise against the evidence. It claims that there is an evidentialist constraint on promising. In order to responsibly promise to do something, we must be able to predict that we will actually do it. And when we have evidence that we might not follow through, then we cannot make a promise responsibly. This suggests that most wedding promises are in fact not made responsibly. I think that this is the hardest response to resist. There sure seems to be something reasonable about it. However, the response is mistaken. The fundamental flaw with this response is that it asks us to predict what we will do when we should decide what to do. A prediction is based on evidence, at least when it concerns a contingent matter of fact in the future. But a decision is not based on evidence. When we decide to do something, we don't infer on the basis of evidence what we will do, but we base our decision on what we want, value, or are obliged to do. For example, when you are in a coffee shop, you don't think that because you've had an espresso 80% of the time, you'll most likely again have an espresso. Rather, you think about what you want to drink, and in light of that, you decide what to order. I can say more precisely why the evidentialist response is implausible. An evidentialist constraint on promising is implausible because it is a constraint on the strength of our reasons for action. It implies that something can speak in favor of doing something only to the extent that it speaks in favor of predicting that we'll do it if we decide to do it. But that is implausible. It can be tremendously important for us to do something, to be resolute, and to resist temptation, even though we are not in a position to predict that we will succeed if we decide to do it. And that is why the evidentialist constraint should be rejected. We need a different approach. I will discuss my favorite one in the next episode.